instead of watching this show. That's a show about a man who wants to kill himself because his wife has cancer, and it's still more fun than this, okay? Spoiler alert, season 2 is on the way, so in the end, he obviously didn't kill himself. Just like... Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
I'm saying that there are people that were the people that did this to both me and Corey that are still working. They're still out there, and they're some of the richest, most powerful people in this business.
Sarah Ruth Ashcraft on Twitter, who has been accusing Tom Hanks of her when she was 13. Her dad sold her to Tom Hanks.
Since when has this brand of common decency and professionalism been put on hold just because of dynamics in the workplace?
At the Golden Globes, what transpired has turned into one of the internet's most talked about celebrity mysteries. When Ricky Gervais launched a cruel joke about the financier tied to the E-Files, the camera turned to Tom Hanks, and his startled expression quickly went viral. At the time, it appeared like just another unpleasant award show moment. But years later, people began probing deeper. Old charges, odd online rumors, and the revelation of the E-Files have all brought Hanks into a far darker discourse about Hollywood elites.
What made you think, you know what, I'm just going to hammer him? I don't care what the...
Well, I thought, when they said, do you want to host the Golden Globes, all that stuff I said in the show was true. I said, I'm going to write my own jokes. Right? And I thought, who do I pander to? The 200 richest people in the room, or the 200 million people watching at home who aren't winning awards, who aren't millionaires. And it was a no-brainer. I was doing it for them.
Back in January 2020, the Golden Globes handed the internet one of its most talked about moments. Ricky Gervais came onto the stage, looked out into a room packed with Hollywood's brightest stars, and did what he usually does. He began roasting everyone. The jokes were flying one after another, from Leonardo DiCaprio's dating past to Felicity Huffman's jail term, and even a hit at Apple for creating glamorous TV series while manufacturing things in sweatshops.
Star in the world, is this what's going on with social media, that Oprah and I cannot go on a billionaire's boat to Tahiti with a former president of the United States and not keep it secret, for God's sake?
Ricky stuff. And then he drops the Epstein line. He says something like, I know he's your friend, but I don't care. He's talking to the room, and the camera cuts to Tom. Tom looks genuinely thrown off, like someone just said something at a dinner party that you really weren't expecting, and now you don't know where to look. Jaw down, eyes wide, not a great poker face. That clip gets screenshotted instantly. By the next morning, it's the biggest meme of the night.
Watching this show, that's a show about a man who wants to kill himself because his wife dies of cancer, and it's still more fun than this, okay? Spoiler alert. Season 2 is on the way, so in the end, just like Jeffrey Epstein.
No.
Shut up! I know he's your friend, but I don't care.
It was vintage Ricky Gervais, sharp, unpleasant, and absolutely unapologetic. Then he took it a step farther. In the midst of the speech, he brought up the banker related to the E-Files, saying that he knew some individuals in that same room could have been acquainted with him, but he didn't care. And just at that time, the camera cut directly to Tom Hanks. The response was swift and memorable. Most folks just laughed, made jokes about it, and went on. But years later, that identical moment began garnering a totally different type of attention. People started reviewing the footage and raising questions that hadn't truly been explored before. What precisely made Tom Hanks respond like that? And why did the camera cut to him at that particular second? That's when the narrative begins to transcend much beyond a simple award show joke. Because once people started exploring, they began linking that moment to a much bigger set of events. There were earlier charges from an actor called Isaac Capey. In 2018, there was a bizarre Instagram picture released by Tom Hanks that some people regarded as a cryptic message. There was the problem of him and his wife getting Greek citizenship. And there came the enormous release of the E-Files in January 2026, when users online claimed his name appeared in specific papers.
Tom Hanks is hiding a very dark secret.
Who could forget Forrest Gump and Toy Story and even The Polar Express? One of my favorite movies of all time and franchises was Toy Story. And now you and I both know that Tom Hanks voices Woody, right? Oh, we're wrong. In the 90s is when Woody first burst onto the screen with the rest of the toys in Toy Story. And I'm sure we all remember Tom Hanks' voice saying, "There's a snake in my boot," or, "You are a toy!" Yeah, but what if I told you that Tom Hanks didn't really do all of it? So in the franchise itself, Tom Hanks has 10 credits as Woody. There's someone with even more, which means that Tom Hanks doesn't voice Woody as much as the other person, which then means that Woody is somebody else, statistically speaking. And that person is the one and only Jim Hanks. That's right, his brother. Jim has 24 credits as Woody, and Jimbo has made a career off of impersonating his own brother. So we actually hear Jim Hanks doing an impersonation of his brother doing Woody. Jim as Woody can be heard in TV shows, films, and other merchandise.
Suddenly, all of those unconnected episodes were being drawn into one enormous story. What began as a viral meme has grew into years of conspiracy theories around one of the most renowned performers in the world. So, to understand how all this transpired, it helps to go back to that night at the Golden Globes. Ricky Gervais was doing precisely what the crowd anticipated, pushing limits and making the room uncomfortable. He had already roasted half the celebs in attendance when he dropped the line about the financier tied to the e-files, saying that even if that person had pals sitting in the crowd, he wasn't going to hold back. And that one statement, paired with the uncomfortable camera cut, ended up kicking off a chain reaction that the internet is still talking about today.
That's the thing about offence, isn't it? When people say they're offended, it's that just because you're offended, it doesn't mean you're right. You know, it's offence is about feelings, and feelings are personal. Some people are offended by equality. So what? You know, so you can't second guess people. If you try and please everyone, you'll please no one. With comedy as well, I think you've got to deal with taboos and contentious issues. And sometimes you deal in irony, and some people don't get that. But, you know, you can't legislate against stupidity. Otherwise you'll be doing nothing, you know, because I'm not doing it for the 200 egos in the room. I'm doing it for the 200 million people watching around who aren't winning awards, who aren't millionaires. And freedom of speech is so important these days. I've reached the age now where I don't care anymore. It's a sin. To joke about all the bad things, that's a waste. Because that's exactly what we should joke about. If you can laugh in the face of adversity, you're bulletproof.
He is totally right about all of this. And also, the minute he steps off set, every one of the harpies of The View will attack him.
Instead of merely laughing at the meme, individuals in the comment sections began revisiting the footage and studying the response frame by frame. Suddenly, the discussion shifted. Viewers started inquiring why Hanks appeared so uncomfortable at that particular time. Out of all the jokes Ricky cracked that night, why did his countenance alter notably during the one about the famed financier? Since Jim Caviezel and Ricky Gervais accomplished just that. Allegedly, they pleaded with Epstein's handler to save the children from Epstein, but the handler refused. You know, these two gentlemen have bravely uncovered the nefarious links between Jeffrey Epstein and the exploitation of children in Hollywood for many years. Their careers took a hit as they endured scorn and made fun of. Strangely, they persisted in talking. Now the disclosed Epstein docs are proving them correct. Through released papers and links with convicted criminals, it turns out a lot of influential individuals were reportedly part of a widespread cover-up that is now becoming revealed. So naturally, everyone is wondering how many people were aware of what was happening, who turned a blind eye, and why are so many Epstein files still sealed?
What did go on at Zorro?
So twisted and so dark.
Jeffrey Epstein's mansion of horrors. In the middle of nowhere.
Some of the most heinous things that anyone could imagine.
Place so evil.
Both died by strangulation during rough fetish sex.
No one could hear his victim's screams.
He destroyed my life.
That's next on 60 Minutes.
The Zorro Ranch in New Mexico sounds like it could be a desert Disneyland. After all, it was named after the fictional masked crusader.
By now, we all know the Epstein tale. He was a wealthy creep who did a lot of awful things. But the thing people don't really know is how deep Epstein's organization truly went. And Jim Caviezel and Ricky Gervais are revealing precisely that. You see, Epstein was a successful hedge fund manager. He molested scores of minor females, luring vulnerable youngsters with offers of money, many as young as 14. But despite substantial evidence and several victims, Epstein secured a favorable plea agreement in 2008.
Closer look at what's been called a sweetheart deal, the 2008 agreement that let Jeffrey Epstein avoid a federal trial and serve just 13 months in prison, despite evidence he had underage girls. That deal was negotiated by Alex Acosta, the ex-U.S. attorney in southern Florida and former labor secretary who served during President Trump's first term, before he resigned in 2019 once the plea deal came back under the spotlight.
It's very clear that Alex Acosta ran a deeply flawed investigation of the Epstein case. He also would not admit that Mr. Epstein received a sweetheart deal.
This plea agreement provoked a lot of concern about structural failings in the judicial system. To this day, many individuals are still demanding responsibility and justice for Epstein's victims. But justice has been delayed, and for many, it has never arrived.
Days of sweeping this under the rug are over. We, the survivors, say no more. If Ghislaine Maxwell were pardoned, it would undermine all the sacrifices I made to testify and make mockery of mine and all survivors' suffering.
We are not going away. We are not going to be quiet, and we are not going to give up.
Many of Epstein's victims were fragile adolescent females from underprivileged backgrounds. Some were as young as 14 or 15 when they were initially recruited. The temptation of money was a tremendous enticement for these girls, many of whom came from damaged homes or tough living conditions. One victim recounted beginning to go to Epstein when she was 14 or 15, getting $200 for massages that typically progressed into AB. $200, that's all it took. Another recalled being recruited from school parties and trailer parks, illustrating the systematic nature of the abuse. This wasn't random. This was orchestrated. They knew where to locate vulnerable females and they sent them to Epstein. And here's what: they stepped inside Epstein's house, had a frightening setup.
I voted to get these damn files released, and it's like a total 180.
Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein?
He campaigned, he said, look, we're going to release the files. And what has been disappointing is we've, for the last 5-6 months, have had to fight the administration at every step of the way, which gets me to believe, like, who?
If stories are to be believed, Jim Caviezel and Ricky Gervais apparently sought to interfere at some time and tried to rescue some of these females. But their screams fell on deaf ears. Why? Because Epstein had surrounded himself with strong connections who ensured he was well protected for years, and anybody who attempted to speak out or expose him was apparently blacklisted. Their jobs were purportedly harmed, and their lives altered. And it wasn't only in Hollywood. Epstein's empire was regarded as immense. His abuse was not confined to Palm Beach. He was accused of orchestrating events with teenage females at his houses in New York City, New Mexico, and his own Caribbean island. Some stories stated victims included persons transported from Eastern European nations. This wasn't depicted as one individual in one city, but rather an operation encompassing numerous areas. Flight records and address books showed Epstein's contacts to numerous affluent and prominent individuals, including politicians, actresses, professors, celebrities, and benefactors. Despite the quantity of claims and documented victims, most of this remained unpunished for years. It is commonly acknowledged that Epstein was not operating alone, but had a network of enablers and allies. Ghislaine Maxwell has been characterized as Epstein's close colleague, and together they were accused of keeping control over victims and encouraging abuse.
You're taught that predators are old men in alleys. You're not told that a friend, a socialite, a woman.
This network made it much more difficult for victims to flee or seek aid. The abuse was reportedly routinely facilitated and covered. Victims were warned no one would believe them, and for years many testimonies show that was the case. It is said that Jim Caviezel and Ricky Gervais were aware of these difficulties and sought to speak out, but were up against something far greater than Epstein, a system of protection including powerful persons. Some accusations imply that individuals who spoke out risked professional penalties. The fact that many suspected participants have not been prosecuted has been extensively condemned, and some think full responsibility has not yet been established. Jim Caviezel, for example, has talked about obstacles he had when working on films covering controversial issues. It has been stated that several studios distanced themselves from such work, and that there were warnings regarding possible reaction inside the business. Despite this, one such picture apparently made $251 million, demonstrating tremendous popular interest. Caviezel has also characterized the entertainment sector as very complicated, implying that eliminating particular characters does not undermine bigger institutions. Questions have long been raised regarding why Epstein was able to dodge harsher punishment for so long. In 2008, he got a plea agreement that many opponents characterized as extremely moderate considering the seriousness of the charges. At the time, prosecutors had accumulated evidence, including documents and witness testimony. However, the original accusations brought were restricted, which received substantial criticism. Epstein's legal team, made up of notable defense lawyers, worked closely with prosecutors throughout the case, and the management of the process has subsequently been questioned by critics.
I know this. The real story begins in 2006-07 when he's arrested in Palm Beach. And I think this is public and it's worth looking at, is the search warrant. The search warrant basically protected him and it prevented the authorities from collecting meaningful information. It was like, you're allowed to look in drawer 3, but not drawer 4. How did that happen?
Epstein finally pled guilty to 2 state prostitution-related crimes and spent nearly 13 months in a Palm Beach County jail, where reports claimed he had unique privileges, including a private room and permission to leave for work.
When he was actually in his private cell, the door was open. Epstein's cell door was left unlocked, and he had access to the attorney room where a television was installed for him. We'll make that clear. So he is not only allowed to leave his room whenever he wants, allowed to leave the sheriff's office for 12 hours a day, including one day of the weekend, because it's 6 days a week. They also went through an effort to install a television for him in the attorney's room. Not even the attorneys got that, but they installed one for him.
Victims were not told of the plea agreement, essentially removing them from the legal process and disempowering them a second time. First, they were abused. Then they were ignored. This conclusion was widely viewed as a betrayal by the prosecutors tasked to bring Epstein responsible. Federal prosecutors regarded the decision as a success in compelling Epstein to register as an offender, but there was no systematic mechanism tracking his activities. Reports suggested that Epstein continued to travel widely, raising worries about the efficiency of his monitoring. He took his own plane, visited his island, and according to claims, maintained detrimental activities throughout that period. Since the plea bargain, roughly 24 civil cases have been filed relating to Epstein's acts. Some lawsuits try to find further facts about the scope of the abuse and the probable participation of others, while others have tried to challenge the plea agreement itself. However, Epstein's death means that complete responsibility via criminal prosecution is no longer conceivable. Legal activists have underlined the significance of integrating victims in the judicial process, noting that ignoring them might further hurt those impacted. The Epstein case has come to represent systemic flaws and the need for change in how abuse cases are handled. Despite countless charges and alleged victims, the leniency demonstrated enabled Epstein to dodge complete justice for years. Many victims have alleged that their voices were disregarded, while Epstein was offered advantages throughout his sentence, including a private space and the freedom to leave for work.